Pull the chair also.
Yeah. I know, it's not the suit I normally have on the wrinkles. It's like on my dad's. I love the
Yeah, pull the seal first. That's what you could have done, is just like start it and then see what you could adjust it to. Yeah, if you just like stand there.
I guess you can swinging around.
Yeah. Do you want to do that right now?
Yeah.
Let's show it.
Yeah.
In the future, I'll make sure everybody's going to Is the lieutenant governor becoming as well? Oh, that's great.
Well, he functions kind of without us. So I just assume probably not.
I'll just sit by you. What? I'll just sit by you.
Kind of like, trying to figure out how the way it is.
Like,
We're live streaming from Twitter.
oh, yeah.
Did you guys check out how the angle looks on the phone?
So I guess. So he said that using that live thing, so like they need to see it. So at some point we can see I can introduce it. Yeah, and then I'll say that is coming up. Okay. I'm going to sit test it right here.
Hey, I like that. It wasn't my just like oh yeah, that's I actually checked out the I watched
It looks so professional, actually. Oh boy.
Twitter's at Whirligig. Or the Twitter's at Whirligig. Here's the MI capital. Oh, yes.
You sitting there, Drew?
oh yeah.
Can I like talk to the State Department so far? Sure. So yeah, I'll keep it pretty short. So you know, I'll go through like the ways to get revenue, like all the budget stuff. You want me to? Okay, so you talk about like the website and state bird, like there's a seal and all that. Yeah, you want to do that before questions? Yeah, right there. So I'll cover like all the policy stuff, and then I'll go up and come back. And I guess that will be like, all right, we're open to questions. And then I'll say, well, all right, so
tomorrow, let's pull the backdrop over. Let's pull the backdrop over tomorrow.
yeah, you can look at
There's a flag that rolls down on top, too. Yeah.
All right, guys, quiet down.
So, hello, I'm the governor, Bennett Lowe, and then we got the chief of staff, the secretary of state, and lieutenant governor over here. So, I guess, what have we been doing in the State Department so far? A lot of it's been looking into potential revenue sources. We've been doing a lot of research into how much money we end up making off the legalization of marijuana. This would be from 15% sales tax we would put on it, from the income tax that we would get from the jobs that it would create, which obviously range around depending on what calculation we went off of. But it looks like that'll be able to generate hopefully around 411 million to 1.18 billion, depending on what we get back from the PO office. So things looking pretty good there. We've also been looking into getting more income from investing marketing into a state lottery, because we do have a state lottery and we tax it at 70 cents for every dollar, but we only make around $6.04 million off of this lottery. And if you do that per person, it's only about $1.57 per person is what they spend on lottery. And the lowest of any state in the entire union that has a lottery that for like spending is $34 per person in the state of North Dakota. So we think if we can increase marketing to this, we can get people to spend more on the lottery and make a ton of money. Like if you look at Michigan, they make $888.9 million, I think, off their state lottery. And that's not what the lottery makes, it's the taxes that are pulled off that lottery. So this is an incredible amount of money we can get from this kind of thing. And in addition, we've also been looking to possibly getting rid of the taxable maximum for Social Security to try to get more funding for health and welfare. And then all of the state departments have been approved, and then they've been working on getting their budgets, so we're almost done with our fully itemized budget. Hopefully we can get that all passed and looking good. We've been talking about investing into things as well. I've had conversations with all the mayors on all the problems they have, and it looks like sewers and infrastructure is major ones that go around, but there's obviously other issues for that, and we're budgeting money into the overall budget for giving to these cities for their problems, as well as investing in infrastructure. And infrastructure we've kind of had varies wildly at cost, but it looks like we should be able to, if this new report we got is correct, we should be able to fund most, if not all, of the state highway. But on another report that we got, it would be in a ludicrous amount of money and nowhere that the state government could spend. It'd be like over $1 billion, and in that case we couldn't fund the entire highway, but it kind of depends again on what we get fully back as the true cost of this. But we will try to put in as much money as we can to investing into this, as well as working with the federal government and helping to improve our states as much as we can. So I'm going to pass it over to the Secretary of State to talk about what he's been doing, and then after that we'll be open to questions.
All right, so as you can see here on this computer, we have the state seal. I was in charge of designing this for the state. It has a phoenix surrounding a star, and that represents Boise State rising from the ashes and rising to glory, which is what the star represents. The banner below is Latin, and it stands for "We Rise from Ashes," so that again symbolizes our ability to get out of the hole that we've been dug into. Now, besides that, we've been doing some other cool things that we feel like will really brighten up the city and help us with our ad campaign. One of them is the state bird, which is the phoenix. Another one is the state animal. I know we have a Twitter poll going right now, and the, what is it, mongoose?
No, vagrant.
Vagrant, that's winning. So we just want to represent you guys' opinions, and we want to make it fun, but still get a lot of stuff done and get together the Boise State spirit, so that'll carry over into tourism and other things that will really help us all. Bring it over to Governor Lowe again for questions. So,
Yeah, so I'm open for whatever questions. So, just are you calling?
I got it. Mayor?
I was just wondering if you were looking into federal funding options for state highways. A lot of states do receive a lot of federal funding when it comes to major infrastructure plans like that. I was wondering if you exposed those.
We've definitely looked into going into federal grants. I know that I believe the Senate has proposed something where we're trying to get federal grants to help pay for the Jackson Airport. We haven't gotten any exact numbers back on what federal grants could possibly be, but we would all be for like federal and state government funding these roads, so we could possibly expand infrastructure even further if we can get both federal and state governments paying for these.
Yes, sir.
Does your administration still plan to give tax incentives to businesses going green or having environmental?
Yes, we definitely support that. We really want to encourage more businesses with tax incentives, and especially encourage businesses that want to go green with more tax incentives.
In the back.
Has there been any discussion about education in the state currently?
Mm-hmm. We have talked a lot about education with the Board of Education and the Board of Trustees. So I guess, are you talking about like more collegiate level stuff or more like local level stuff? Okay. I guess then Board of Education. Do you guys want to take over for that?
Wait, can we have the president come up here?
Oh yeah, whoever's the president for the Board of Education.
That would be me.
Okay.
Should I just stand here or what?
Yeah. Just take your question.
Okay, yeah, what's your, do you have like a more specific question rather than just like Like what? Yes.
What's the state budget before for education? What's
The state budget right now is sitting roughly at like $1.1 billion or not. Yes.
Is that overall or just for education?
That's just for education. I'll have to double check the numbers. That's the rough estimate right now. And then we have to go back and compare budgets with the other departments and decide. But that's what we're running roughly. Any questions on policy or anything, or just, is that what you guys wanted to know? Yes?
What do you plan to achieve in the sexual education courses that so many other people have been advocating for?
Okay, so our deals for the sexual education course is contraception over abstinence, because we believe it's more realistic to prevent unplanned pregnancies by teaching people about how sexual reproduction works and promoting them to have easy access to contraception and like birth control and things like that. So because the reality of adolescent sex is kind of just going to happen, but believe we can institute these programs to prevent unplanned pregnancies.
How do you propose to increase security in our schools and the safety of our children?
So some things we're looking at, we're going to partner with our state sheriff department, and we're going to try to have sheriffs in schools and officers in schools and just patrolling more closely. And we're also going to look at proactive things like improve mental health and red flag students. Obviously, if there's concerns regarding a student, we'll look more closely at them and try to work with them to ensure that they do not become a problem student that threatens the safety of others.
That's going to be our last question for the president. We just want to touch on all topics in terms of education. So let's give a round of applause, everyone. Yes, sir, in the front.
Governor, how do you feel about the closed sessions between the Senate and the House today, and how important is open communication between the legislators to your administration?
I think it's very important that we have open communication so that way we can try to get things passed more efficiently. I know that there were several bills in the House and in the Senate, I think on infrastructure and like the legalization of marijuana that were structured very similarly. So I think we should try to get some conference committees on similar topics to talk about those. And I know also yesterday we talked to the Senate how we had started our plan for building infrastructure, and they had a very similar plan in the Senate. So I think we should focus on being very open with communication and on talking about these things so we don't double track and waste time by going over the same things.
In the very back.
This is a question for the governor. I'm not sure you had time to look over this, but what is your opinion for the Mandatory Service Act 2018 requiring that all people ages 18 to 28 serve in the National Guard for 2 years?
I do not think that we should do this motion. Obviously, I have a planned meeting with the House of Representatives sometime in the third committee meeting is when I was trying to do it. But this would be a very expensive motion to do for the state government and for any government, because this is an issue that's going to cost a lot of money, and it's something where we kind of need to be prioritizing where we have our spending specifically.
And then you, sir, in the white.
What is your thoughts on Common Core, and what advantages and disadvantages are you going to be putting in place?
Are you talking about for the university level, or again?
Just overall, in general, what are your thoughts about Common Core and what we need to change?
I would be for having some kind of Common Core. I believe our Board of Education talked about maybe changing tests with that kind of thing along those lines. Again, it'd be something.
Do you want me to come back up there? Or?
You can stay seated.
Just stay seated.
So basically, our stance on Common Core is we're trying to look at it because it's difficult, because we'd like to change standardized testing a little bit and decrease the intensity of it and increase the frequency of it, so that instead of large, heavyweight tests that are more stressful for students and result in outliers, like people messing up on a single day of testing. The problem with that is it's difficult to get funding then because you're on a different type of standardized testing. So we're looking into variable solutions to that problem.
As you stated in your preface to this, sewage seems to be a problem throughout Boise State. What are your specific plans that you are going to implement to fix that problem?
Well, we have planned city grants that we want to hand out to cities that have these kind of issues, as well as we've also been working with the Department of Environment on increasing water quality stuff and going into sewage. It is a major problem. It's something that we need to solve. It's not something we can put off, so we definitely be putting funding into fixing all the sewage systems around the whole state.
You sir in the stripes?
After going over the budget this morning with your administration, is the deficit still an issue? What's your thoughts on the deficit?
We're still going over our itemization budget. It's still being finalized, and we still have to send it to the Senate. It might take another hour, but I think we're on the right track, and it's going to be finished. But it's looking good in terms of deficit-wise.
Yeah, it looks like, again, we need to know how much revenue we get from everything, but it looks like we're not sure whether the deficit will be non-existent as we're increasing spending in several things, but the deficit should look to be significantly less than it was last year.
You sir in the Nike?
What is the possibility of a surfing competition taking place to increase revenue for the state?
That's something that we really were pushing for with tourism and in the businesses of commerce, investing heavily into advertisement for increasing this tourism. And we think that something that could work well with that is a surfing competition. It's obviously, we've got a very warm environment on the coastlines. Even in the winter, it only gets to 54 degrees, and it's mainly in the 90s during the summer. So I think that could be something that attracts a lot of tourists to our position. Like there's other things we've been talking about, like just overall, like for increasing tourism, like having better roads, having better airports, than fixing like the football stadium in Monroe, and having things like that. This would be like one of those programs where we try to have some kind of tourist attraction and a bunch of advertisement for it to increase the number of tourists who come back to our state and spend income into our state.
Carlos?
On the topic of tourism, I know at the mayoral meeting, Jefferson City brought up the subject of prostitution being legalized statewide. What are your stances on that, and do you think that's a realistic proposition?
We discussed it earlier, and we really feel like our image as Boise State, and especially in our capital city of Jefferson, shouldn't be really presented as endorsing prostitution. Mm-hmm. And we were going to discuss it further, as well as with all members of our cabinet, because all members of our cabinet haven't given their own stance on it yet. But that's personally how I feel about it.
I think in general we're trying to build up a real big touristy area, and I think while prostitution could certainly contribute to this tourism, as it would be an attraction in some cases, it would also be a deterrent in a lot of other cases. We're a much more conservative nation than a lot of other places like in Europe that have these kind of systems in place. So while it could definitely attract a lot of stuff, it could also deter from a lot of things. So we're going to have to look at the economic benefits of it and really look at to see if it's really worth having in our state.
Booster again, the white.
What kind of changes are we going to be doing to the Monroe football stadium, and what kind of infrastructure is going to be dealt with that?
Specifically with the Monroe football stadium?
Yeah.
Well, we kind of just want to give the funding to Monroe to fix up this football stadium. I know last year the Legionnaires made it to the playoffs, but they were knocked out in the wild card, and that's such a shame. But we've got a good rookie that we drafted, and then we're picking up another, I think it was another Pro Bowler or something coming in. So the football team's looking really good, and with us getting better and better, we don't want this football team to leave. So we're going to focus on giving them money to repair the stadium, as well as having them be a big part of the highway that we're planning on building, because Monroe has a large port, which would make it very good for like importing or exporting out of the state, and having a large highway to alleviate this and make it much easier for cars to travel, as well as going from the Jackson Airport to this football stadium, which would attract a lot of people.
Let's go Legionnaires. Woo! Legionnaires. Carlos, yeah.
I don't know if you've talked about this yet, but regarding the highway, what are the details? Like, what cities are they going to go through, and things like
Department
that?
of Transportation, Housing. He's been working heavily on this, so maybe you can speak about it a little bit for us.
All right. So, as far as our plans for the highway, it's mainly being developed as something that is designed to give us a tourist kind of way to get across our state easier, and to give particular cities with these interests, and along with trading interests, ways to get there. So the cities that we at the cabinet have mainly considered would be Monroe to Jackson to Harrison and Van Buren. And those are the main ones we would like to try to connect. As far as the other ones, if they make improvements as far as increasing programs that would give a reason for people to want to visit. We could definitely try and see extensions, but we definitely want this highway to be mainly used for being able to tour our state. In the back, you had your hand up first.
I have a question for you, Transportation Secretary. Do you plan to use alternative materials to build this highway, or is this concrete and how
it is currently being bounced around in the House and the Senate exactly what we want to use, but it is definitely way easier and way a better solution to try and use somewhat of a mixed material as far as like recyclables and along with the standards. So as far as that goes,
would you be willing to use Harrison City's recycling plant to procure these recyclable materials to build this road?
We've received offers from both Harrison City to use their recycling plant to get plastic, and we've also received a new recent offer that the governor mentioned earlier as far as a mixed material that would be coming from Jackson itself, and that would give some employment opportunities to them and their city.
What is your stance on toll roads to bring in money for the government?
We haven't really bounced that idea around a lot. If it comes down to it, we may see that as a solution, but as of right now, we seem to be doing fine without those. So,
what is your stance on it, Mr. Governor?
On toll roads?
Yes.
I think that it would be a good idea to introduce some toll roads so we could increase the budget that would go, especially into the maintenance of these new highways and roads. But at the same time, it would slow down the traffic a lot. We wouldn't want to add too many, especially like, it could make us unpopular if we have a ton of toll roads if people are traveling all around the state. But I think we would definitely want to introduce some tolls, but not an excessive amount is what we're looking at.
And we'll have one more question for Zach, so we can go back and we can focus on the governor a little more. But in the very back.
Yes, Secretary. Considering how the city of Washington is contemplating building a concert hall, do you view an extension of the freeway to the city of Washington to be a viable option? So a link between Harrison and Washington.
I also have heard things about a concert hall, and apparently hotels have offered to move into there. If Washington makes these plans and we see those developments, and the material isn't that expensive, we could see an extension working. But if the materials are expensive and if Washington's plans don't fall through, I wouldn't see it happening.
All right, thanks, guys.
With many of the cities vying for aggressive options towards this cult in Harrison, how does the state want to deal with this?
I've talked a lot with the county sheriffs, my own head of police over there, and then in addition with the mayor of Harrison. And it seems like we're trying to come to some kind of a negotiation peacefully first to see if we can deal with these cult members. I know that they threatened that if anything was done, that they would threaten action. There's words of them possibly kidnapping somebody, though that's not really confirmed whether that's just something that was in the Whirligig or whether that's something that the cult has actually done. But we have to be very careful in how we act with this. This could end up like Waco in Texas, where it was a massive siege and everyone in the cult died. We want to avoid these massive casualties if possible. And we know that these cultists have a large number of AR-15 rifles and who knows what other kind of weapons stockpiled up. So we want to try to avoid a conflict if possible and try to work more towards negotiations.
Sir?
Do you have any knowledge or insight towards the legality of processing developing plastic waste?
I believe that it is illegal from what the federal government has stated, but that's just interstate commerce. They have no real control over whether the state itself builds these plastic roads. There is an environmental concern, and we would like to look into this environmental concern. But it looks like it's not really anything that's been really approved or disproved by anybody. Like, they had a bunch of these plastic roads in India, and they haven't had any real environmental problems. and they're more in a warmer climate, however. So we might want to focus on having these kind of roads in more of the warmer climates, like along the coastlines, focusing mainly where that is, and then having more maybe of some other material and where it gets colder, where it could possibly freeze. But it doesn't appear to be illegal on the state level, and we can always argue states' rights for this if it makes it cheap and able to build this highway, so we can invest heavily in infrastructure, get more jobs going, and develop the economy a lot more.
Sure, in the very back.
Governor, do you harbor any concern over the use of plastic roadways, both for safety and longevity terms, on a statewide highway that is expected to have huge amounts of traffic per day?
Yes, I think that we definitely need to look into the maintenance costs and the possible things that could happen with that. I know that something they did with plastic roads, though, is that you could just remove or rebuild just entire sections of them, since they are just made out of plastic, and you could ship them a lot easier around. So we believe that the maintenance on these roads would be a lot cheaper, although we would have to look into the longevity of them, as we obviously don't want highways that fall apart after a couple of years. I think we definitely need to do more research into this to find out what material we should really use, but I think that it's a viable option to use plastic.
Does anyone have any questions for our Lieutenant Governor or Secretary of State, by the way? Just the Governor? Oh, you, sir?
How are you going to stop, what is your stance on using state driver's licenses or state-issued IDs for voting, and how do you prevent unauthorized voting?
Is this to the Secretary of State?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the state government feels that voter ID is not something that should not be required when voting, because it disenfranchises a lot of minority demographics, because a lot of them don't have access to driver licenses or other IDs that they can use. However, there are some other options to get more people registered and to prevent fraud. One is called it's automatic voter registration, which would entail the State Department using DMV connections and people that have already given their contact information to be automatically registered to vote, and they have the ability to opt out. So this would get more people registered and additionally increase voter turnout. This was done in, I believe, Oklahoma or Oregon, I can't remember which one, but in this state, voter turnout increased by over 6%, which is well over the 1.6% national average. So that's something that we're looking to do to change voting for the better.
Use from blue.
For the question for the governor, with cities around the state struggling with standardized test scores, how are you going to possibly improve that so we can get better school systems?
I know we talked, that my Board of Education members talked about having having more spaced out tests in schools, as oftentimes students will cram and cram and cram for a massive 100-point test and then forget all of the information the day after. I know this is something that I've done a lot for tests while I was in school. So having them more spaced out, so you have to be constantly studying and have to be constantly learning information, so that way you're not as stressed for one specific test and you don't have to study insanely amount of times one night or 2 nights or 3 before. You're able to study wide out and retain this knowledge a lot better. We believe this will help with standardized tests as well as possibly increased funding for education.
Does anyone have any questions for our cabinet, by the way? They're all here and present, so if you have any specific questions about each department or what they're doing or what they're up to, feel free to ask them. But if not, we can just continue. You, sir?
Guys, real quick, back to the surfing. What city would that be located in, do you think?
We're not entirely sure what city it would be. For instance, the cities that are on the coast, leaning towards the United States, probably wouldn't have, the best in terms of waves to other countries, as they have, the whole island diverting it. So it would probably be a city on the Pacific side of the state. Although we have to look into that kind of thing. We have to look where tourism is. I know Madison's probably the head for tourism in the whole state, so they'd be a city on the top of our radar. But I think it's something too where we can't just pick a place that's really good for tourism. We have to be looking where surfing actually would be good and would be a viable place to do surfing within our state.
You, sir, in blue.
So I know for my city personally, we have a lot of environmental problems at stake, and I was just going to ask maybe this question for your cabinet, but what are your top priorities when it comes to the environment?
Yeah, do you want to take this one?
My name is John Bachmans, and I am the Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources. And I believe the largest problems facing the city, as you all know, are sewer problems. And in many cities, there's smog and pollution, and a lot of businesses are not regulating their waste that they're releasing into the atmosphere. And I feel some pressure needs to be put on them. And going green, of course, and especially the nuclear power plant would be a benefiting factor that would be green. Are there any questions?
And you said you were from Jefferson City, right? And then a lot of the waste there is wastewater and runoff. So planning with the budget, we're putting a lot more into the budget for water pollution, and we're taking away from a little more insignificant things because we feel that's a bigger problem that's really consistent with all cities. So that's what we're planning on doing. Carlos? Okay, go ahead.
Would you be willing to fund a grant to Harrison City to fix our water pollution problems? It's very serious there.
I know there are a lot of cities that have water pollution problems, so I would look towards trying to help every city if I could possible, and I would weigh the pros and cons of each city. So definitely I would look into it, yes.
We're going to have just one more question.
Okay, you talked about putting pressure on cities that don't take care of their waste problems. How exactly do you plan to do that?
I've heard rumors about the carbon tax or emissions that are being released into the atmosphere. If people do not follow these precautions that are set by possibly bills in the Houses and the Senate that they have been talking about, there will be stricter fines on these companies and other regulations.
We were also discussing a tax incentive to those companies who'd switch over to be greener, and it entice other companies to have greener and safer options. Thank you. That'll be all for him today.
And then, also in addition to this, we're not really trying to propose any statewide carbon tax or anything. It would just be if a city wants to propose that. We don't plan on putting any extra taxes on businesses while we're still in this massive recession.
You sir in the blue? Or the gray, my bad.
What are your thoughts on the legalization of sports gambling and putting taxes on sports gambling?
I believe that sports gambling was legalized by the actual the federal United States Congress, just recently. But we'd be for doing that so we could try to raise more money. But obviously, it wouldn't be running rampant or running wild. We try to place restrictions on it to make sure nobody gets harmed by this new industry. But we'd be for increasing this.
You sir in suit?
Following along with that, how do you feel about the gambling on non-professional sports, like let's say collegiate sports?
I guess it would fall under a similar thing to that, but we'd have to especially be stringent with protection because these are college students, these are collegiate sports. Yeah, we've got our Division I Boys State University, and we're working on trying to repair the stadium there and get it up to NCAA regulations. But we would definitely want to be, if we did have gambling on collegiate level sports, we'd have to be very strict and very stringent with them to make sure that the students there aren't being exploited for their potential economic factor in getting to the college.
You sir in the green?
All right. Some have concerns that you have gone back on your word to appoint members of your cabinet that will challenge your reasoning and push your administration in a bipartisan and a bi-city direction. In what ways have you met these promises, and what do you think of these allegations?
I'd like to believe these allegations are false. I'd like to think that I appointed people who I thought were best for these positions because that's what I definitely tried to do. I have had pushback on ideas. We've been bouncing ideas back and forth, and we certainly don't agree on everything. There's been much argument and much debate in the state cabinet. I think that we definitely debate a lot of things and we argue a lot of things. We try to be as spread out through where we're giving money to states and stuff. We're not trying to focus on any specific city or anything. We're trying to spread these out to where we think it would most benefit the economy, most benefit the state. So I'd like to think these allegations are false.
As Chief of Staff, it was my duty yesterday to help appoint and help select each member of this cabinet. And I feel each member of this cabinet has their own views and their own way of thinking that's unique and helps bring unique things to the table that are all completely different, but all positive and reinforcing each other. So I really feel like that's important. That's how these allegations are false. Thank you. In the white.
This question is directed towards the governor. How do you and your cabinet plan to attack controversial issues such as abortion, health care, and gun violence when the state's Congress seems to be relatively split on these issues?
Well, something with healthcare that I talked about, and we'd have to get more into this because we're still trying to finalize the state budget for this kind of thing. But possibly arguing more with patent holders of drugs so we can try to argue down the price of these drugs and hopefully decrease the overall cost of healthcare for people. And then again, this is something we would need to talk about more with more in the state with all of my department heads and everything. It's something we need to look into more, that we need to talk about more. We've kind of been focusing on trying to finish up the budgets and seeing where we need to throw around money, but we definitely look into like possible laws and stuff like this in the future.
We're only going to take 3 more questions, by the way. You, sir, in the blue.
I believe this question is Lieutenant Governor, but how do you propose to increase collaboration between the 2 chambers of Congress?
Yeah, just touching on that. So basically, we've formed some conference committee for the bills that are already in play. We've already noticed that 3 bills are similar to each of us. One's covering marijuana, another one's covering highway, just for, just so you guys know that. And, forming these conference committees, that's the best way to talk it out. You get members from each side, as you guys know. And that's the best way to put out collaboration, my idea. We also, today, some of you may know, Senate, we got some bills from the House, and we decided to go closed just to get our own thoughts through it, and just to see. But once we go through it with our own committees, we reopen it back up and give our honest opinion of the House bills back to them. Just the right way to do it, I believe, and the collaboration we have with them, I feel like, is strong. And I know the Speaker of the House very well, Zach Kaufman, and I respect him a lot. So we've been talking a lot, just making sure that we can keep both chambers of representation.
Any further questions? Oh, you, sir.
Governor, where do you feel that Boise State is headed?
I hope that we're heading for a much brighter and better future in Boise State. We've found a lot of new ways to increase the revenue into the state government, and we want to try to invest this into our future. We want to be investing into economic development, into tourism advertising, into infrastructure. We're trying to repair cities and having all their problems, from sewers to airports to whatever. I believe that Boise State is heading in a positive direction because we actually have some flow of income if we can get everything passed that we want to, where we can use it to better our state and make sure that we have a better future for years to come.
Thank you for your time, everyone. Really appreciate it. I think we should end it on there. If you need to contact anyone in the governor's office, contact me. Come to the governor's office and knock on the door. At 248-212-5140. You can call me or text me. And we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you for streaming the.
Additionally, a website has